Well, welcome into another episode of the Informing New Zealand Beef podcast, as well as on video for our second season, as we meet those that the Beef and Lamb Genetics team met on their North American trip across the US and Canada in the middle of 2023, to be able to extend the learnings and insights that they had from their trip to you at home, wherever you are listening or watching. And of course, the team would have been very excited to meet their counterpart at the American Angus Association's genetic wing, known as Angus Genetics Incorporated, or AGI. The American Angus Association serves 25,000 members across both the US and Canada, responsible for maintaining the pedigree records of Angus cattle, but also play a crucial role in the breed improvement through genetic selection. The website has a huge amount of resources, including a dedicated Angus University. Joining me is President of Angus Genetics Incorporated, Kelli Retallick, based in Missouri. Welcome, Kelli. It would have been awesome to see face-to-face Jason and Anna and the team that I know you work a lot alongside on a lot of projects.
Yeah, it was great having them here in the office. It's always nice when we all get on one continent. You know, we get out of the computer screens and we all get in the same room. So it was just excellent to have them. And they had such a progressive group with them of breeders. And it's always fun to be around like-minded individuals. So we had a ball.
Yeah, I can only imagine. So just touching on that, what are some of the projects that you have worked in the past in collaboration with Beef and Lamb Genetics?
Yeah, so actually we had a individual that came to us from Beef and Lamb Genetics. Dr. Stephen Miller actually joined us as our director of research some time ago. He's now since moved on and went to Eggboo in Australia. So he's kind of a world traveler, but that was really my first glance at Beef and Lamb New Zealand and kind of what they did and who they were. And so Jason Archer in particular was an individual who I made a joke when he was here in the office in front of our staff. They had joined us for our monthly staff meeting. I said, hey, Jason is a guy that I kind of really was kind of in awe of when I met, because I did a feed efficiency project for my master's program. And I wrote Archer a lot when I went through my reference table. And so it's just been fun to be able to collaborate with them as scientists and just really kind of feed off of each other as we think about, similar organizations, how do we serve all of our stakeholders, all of our membership, and frankly, keep everyone aligned and happy as best as we can.
Jason has that effect on a lot of people, leaving them in awe. I know those who are listening will be laughing, but he's done incredible work for the organisation and genetics in general in his previous roles. Talking about roles, what's your background before the role of president?
Yeah, so I've been in this role of president now. They tell me that I'm in administration, but I still like to hop in on projects from here and there, Sarah. So from that standpoint, when I entered the organization for about 5 years, I was in sort of an extension type role. I really traveled across the country and spoke to members and spoke about our tools and making sure that they could apply the tools, right, that AGI puts out for them to make genetic improvement. And then prior to coming home to Angus, as I would call it, prior to that, I worked for another breed association here in the States and did all of my master's and PhD work there at Kansas State University, where they just have a really applied nature about them. So I grew up in Wisconsin on a beef operation, which if you're here in the States, that's known as the dairy state. So I escaped the dairy state and I got to Kansas, the beef state. And so just a really kind of intrinsic background in the beef industry where, I was able to grow up in it and see it as a young child. And now I get to help all the people that helped raise me, right, breed better cattle. So that's really fun.
And that sort of integrated background that you've had is also so crucial for sort of unpacking the success of Angus as a certified brand in the US. It's been huge, and but at the same time very calculated around that full integration from genetics all the way through to the consumer. What's it been like over your career to see that real seamless partnership all the way through to support your beef cattlemen around how they reach those premiums?
That's been one of the cool success stories of the Angus breed and really the U.S. beef industry in general. There was a time in the U.S. where, we would do national beef quality audits, and basically consumers in this country said, hey guys, your beef product is not very good. right? It was in 1990, I think, was the last beef quality audit when someone, a group of producers kind of stood up and said, we got to make a change here, else we're just going to continue to get rolled over by, pork and poultry and those sorts of things. And that's really where kind of this idea of quality driven beef kind of started. Obviously, CAB started in 1978, our certified Angus beef brand, but it took that monumental shift in making sure that we were putting something on the producer or on the consumer's plate that they really enjoyed. And so it kind of created this whole consumer pull-through strategy, if you will, right, with CAB, where, every part in the chain, whether it's the genetic part that obviously I'm intrinsically part of, creating the tools and helping members breed better cattle, all the way through the management and all the resources that are provided to those cattle until we get on the consumer's plate. And so when we think about that just consumer pull-through demand has allowed for kind of just a sustainable flow of revenue back to our producers, right? Highlighting really just the great work, Sarah, that they've done over the years to really put that high quality product on their plate.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of key traits from a genetic perspective in that consumer preference to get to eating quality that's been ingrained for decades. We are seeing a shift, though, in that consumer demand to other key traits. Can you explain how the American Angus Association and AGI are working as that consumer preference shifts?
I think especially for our U.S. consumers, they are still pretty quality driven, right? They want that marbling. They want that good eating experience. They want it tender, juicy, and they want it consistent. And I think the consistency is the part where our programs really can help play a role. Consistency of that eating experience every time really allows, Angus Genetics to continue to maintain their dominance. When we think about, some of the challenges that maybe not particularly the consumer, but just the industry faces in general, right? Obviously, we talk a lot about sustainability, and I know New Zealand talks about sustainability. The whole world's talking about sustainability. And what we found is when we ask the consumers about sustainability here in the US, what they really talk about is animal welfare, right? Are these animals being treated, with dignity and respect throughout the whole production chain? And that's one thing that we've really focused on through the American Angus Association, is helping our producers get enrolled in beef quality assurance, right? Which is kind of our National Cattlemen's Beef Association stamp on, hey, are you raising these cattle up to these appropriate standards, and taking trainings and making sure that we're spreading that word that, hey, our producers are caretakers of not only the cattle, but of the land. And how do we continue to sell that, or continue to put that story out there for our consumers to hear? And so from that standpoint, that's probably where there could be a slight shift, right, in consumer preference, just from the standpoint is they want to feel good about what they're eating. They not only want to have that juicy, great steak, but they also want to feel good about how it was raised, right? And the people that had part in raising that beef as well.
I mean, obviously the largest breeding group globally, the American Angus Association. You've got the ability to have such incredible global impact. And as I just wanted to pick up there around that sustainability element. In one of the other podcasts that I've recorded for this series, methane's not even on the register really in the States, where it is such a big talking point for us here in New Zealand. So when you do have that global impact and you've got that focus on breeding for different systems, how do we take priority when it's not as much of a focus in the States?
Yeah, no, that is kind of a distinct difference when you kind of travel around. Even if you just go north of the border in Canada, they talk about methane emissions a heck of a lot more than we talk about them here in the States. That's not something where probably a lot of our breeding systems have focused on. To me, when we talk about methane emissions, if you have cows with increased methane emissions, it's lost energy, right? It's energy that's not being used by those animals for some form or function from that standpoint. And while we don't have the genetic tools right now, I do think there's other things, when we talk about methane emissions, some of our dry matter intake data, there's a high correlation there from that standpoint. And so we do a lot of feed efficiency testing here in the States. And so I think some of that work that's done in that feed efficiency realm could definitely correlate, right, to some of the methane work that you guys are doing there in New Zealand as well.
Touching base on beef on dairy and the opportunity for Angus globally to be able to come in to that space even more so. It's a huge demand we're looking down the barrel of for the next 5 years. How are you able to balance that with the traditional beef system genetics?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. So one of the things, again, we go back to those indexes that we talked about. We've designed profitability indexes and profitability functions specifically for that crossbreeding system, right? So whether it's breeding that Angus animal to Holstein females here in the States or that Angus bull to Jersey females here in the States, we've tweak those methodologies that we would use in our native beef systems to try and fit, right, that Angus on dairy system that we have here. And so, whether that's basically looking at the growth curve, not from what we would typically talk about in the beef industry, weaning to the time that those cattle are hung on the rail to basically at the time of birth, right? Those calves, a lot of times those beef on dairy calves, they're getting sold as day olds here in the States, right? 1 day old, they're moving off the farm, those sorts of things. And so we're particularly interested in doing some of that work where we're saying, okay, how do we create that growth curve and that profit function all the way across, right? The entire chain, as well as focusing on some things where dairy animals lack, right? We know dairy animals can marble. They've marbled for years, right? From that standpoint. So they can get that intermuscular fat, but where they have some trouble is maybe muscle conformation, right? So how can we find the right Angus bulls that actually, quote unquote, beef those animals up a little bit, right? Add the red meat yield to those carcasses so they can basically be as economical, right, for the people who are feeding them and also for the packers who are purchasing them and then selling them in boxed beef as completely possible.
Here's a question. By putting American Angus over your Holstein Friesian in America, does that lean up the meat in terms of I know that there's sort of the elements around in the feedlot system with grain fed?
Yeah, they don't necessarily always lean it up. We will get better yield grades in some of our Angus on dairy cattle. The one thing that we still struggle with our Angus on dairy cattle is we do have to feed them longer than our native beef cattle, right? So our native kind of beef on beef type cattle, we can move them out of the feedlot quicker from a feed efficiency perspective. And so that's something that we're really working on with those Angus on dairy cattle. Can we limit the time on feed? Obviously, they do a lot better than the straight bred Holsteins, right, do in the feedlot as far as time on feed. But for sure, right, we got to kind of continue to watch those things. You will see some Angus on dairy genetics, though, especially when you use the right Angus bulls on those dairy animals, actually come across with better yield grades, right, which gets at the overall fatness in those particular animals.
The reason I'm asking that is that beef farmers here in New Zealand, beef finishing, will be thinking a lot about New Zealand's advantage of exporting into the ground beef market and the role New Zealand beef plays and going, ooh.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think that's the way we see it too. I mean, I think it's really interesting because on the Holstein Friesians, right, when you're trying to do this beef on dairy animal, the one thing that the dairy producer really has the ability to do is they don't have to worry about creating that replacement female, right? Here in the States, when we have a native beef system, right, we're worried about not only creating the end product, but most of our producers are going to retain their own replacement females, right? That's where they're going to replace, females for their herd. And so they can't just strictly focus on the terminal traits, right? They have to keep in mind the maternal traits because they need a long-lasting cow herd. And so it's pretty interesting to watch some of these dairies here in the States and some of these programs because they're going to get those genetics, those terminal genetics keyed in really, really well because they just don't have to worry about the maternal influence that they're going to have on the other side.
Absolutely. Programs such as Angus Link, would you be able to explain a little bit more about that?
Angus Link would be basically our feeder calf program. So basically what that is doing is we have kind of two avenues under that. We have our Angus Verified program, which is basically a PVP. That's what we call it here in the States, a process verified program. It's done third party. And then that's basically labeling and auditing and ensuring feeder calves are out of registered Angus sires, right? So that's kind of the first hurdle that we have. And then once we get through that, we have something called our genetic merit scorecard. And really what we're doing is we're kind of opening a window of transparency into the feeder calf industry saying, hey, which one of these calves, because there's a lot of black-hided calves here in the States, right? We have 70%, Angus has 70% market share across all live cattle here in the States. And so there's a lot of black-hided cattle, but not all black-hided cattle are created equal. So that genetic merit scorecard actually allows us to differentiate the genetic value and genetic potential of those groups of feeder calves. So that way, if I'm a buyer sitting in a sale barn, or I'm basically trying to buy those off of a video sale or something like that, I actually know, right, based on real data that's housed here at the American Angus Association, okay, which groups of calves have more genetic potential for me? Which ones are going to be more profitable through the feed yard and actually garner more premiums once they're hung on the rail at the packer or the harvest floor?
Shifting a lot from just buying on colour versus eye within, as you call, sale barns, and
Exactly.
really about how they're going to shift and do. So, yeah, fantastic. Thank you very, very much, Kelli, for your time. We could continue to talk so much about so many things, but I can only imagine that your time spent with the team that went up to North America would have been so special and valuable for them. And thank you so much for sharing your insights with us and this continued relationship with the New Zealand market. So really, really appreciate your time and the great work that you're doing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
That is Kelli Retallick, president of the Angus Genetics Incorporated, known as AGI, as I said, a subsidiary of the American Angus Association and a part of the team's journey around North America, where they did a lot of video interviews and connected with a lot in the New Zealand beef industry. Stay tuned for lots of other episodes where we talk to those that they met and extend out the insights that they found to pass on to you to better inform your beef genetics selection going forward. Have a great rest of your day.